that you've been doing. Okay. All right. So in summary, so I put together sort of a quick slide here as sort of what are for sort of take home messages for this class. And this is just like maybe a little bit of time that I can also just share my life experiences with you and sort of talk through what it means to kind of be successful, right? So this class, even though it's a sports psychology, sports exercise and performance psychology class, it's really about strategies to be successful in whatever it is that you choose to pursue. Right? So, looking back, so we look at some of the research we've covered. So if you are responsible for other people, and even when you're talking about yourself, that's I think someone's mic is on. Let me see here. Let me mute that person, or you can mute yourself wherever you were. So when we talk about how we deal with other people, we talk about a positive versus a negative approach. And so when you're talking about coaching, you're talking about how you deal with yourself, how you deal with your employees. Right? The negative approach, I think people are drawn to that chat. The people are drawn to the negative approach. Like right now, if my daughter does something that I don't like, to change it right then for that moment, the easiest thing that people do is yell, right? Like even in that video we watched, like sports is so funny because the things that we expect in sports almost, because we always talk about how sports translates to everyday life, right? But the way that we treat our athletes, like in nowhere, like no other arena is that okay. And this is something I try to really preach when I talk about this positive coaching approach with athletes, right? If you look at sports as like this microcosm of life, nowhere in life should you cuss and scream and yell at someone if you want them to do something for you, right? Like if I want Frank to turn in his homework, I just can't drop a series of F-bombs and be like, yo, that was my way of motivating you. So like if you think about this positive versus negative approach, the negative approach might get like this instantaneous reaction. But if you think about your role in people's life as not just like right now, but your role in this timeline of events, right? That you have to think about people's sort of life beyond their time with you. Otherwise, that's kind of selfish. Right? And so, and that's what I mean when some coaches take this kind of negative approach to coaching. I almost think it's super selfish because they're going to take what they need from you. They're going to scream, they're going to yell, and they're going to make sure that you go out and win the game for them and sort of get them elevated, and then they send you off in the world without caring about the consequences. Right? I think the biggest consequence of using a negative approach is that it models that approach for other people. Right? So if you're a parent, right, next time your kid does something and you yell at them and they go and they do the thing that you want them to do, you feel pretty good about yourself because your kid is doing what you want them to do. But guess what? The next time your kid wants something done, it thinks the best way to get something done is to yell at somebody. Right? So now all of a sudden kids are yelling back at you and you're like, why is that happening? Well, it's happening because it's learned, right? That's the model, right? If a player shows up to practice and you run sprints until, they puke, the next time they become a coach and they think back, ah, man, when I was late, what did my coach do to me? Oh, yeah, he or she ran me until I puked. And so you serve as a model. So anyways, I think when you are responsible for people, think about their contribution to the world and your contribution to their life, not just that moment, but over the span of their life. And I think to make a small positive influence, it's much more significant than making a big influence, but an influence that affects them negatively in the long run, right? So when you can, take a positive approach. That's reinforcing things you like, not just yelling away things that you don't like, right? It's more work, it's more effortful, but when you can, I'm not saying that you can all the time, but when you can, try to use the default mode as a positive approach, right? It'll also be better for your life too. You're not walking around being angry all the time, okay? So one, try to take a more positive approach in your interactions, right? Two, when we talk about motivation, the most prominent theory of motivation is the self-determination theory. So whenever you're thinking like I'm lacking motivation, or my players are lacking motivation, or whatever else, don't just use that term willy-nilly. Right? And I think that's something that psych students don't understand, is you have a clear advantage over other people who use these terms without sort of realizing their full consequence. Oh, my players aren't motivated. Well, what does that mean? And so you go back and you're like, okay, well, how do you motivate people? Every movie I've seen, to motivate someone, you yell at them, right? Or something crazy, or you give them money or whatever. It's not that simple, right? So as a psych student, understand what motivation is, understand the theories behind motivation. The most prominent theory is self-determination theory. Right? So that goes from not being motivated all the way to being intrinsically motivated and being self-determined. Right? Understand that when you look at the factors that make up motivation, it's the three things that we talk about. Right? Autonomy. So people need to feel that they are responsible for themselves, right? That they have a say in their outcomes. So making people feel autonomous and independent is really important, right? That might mean like don't micromanage, right? That might mean letting them do some things that, might be a little bit wrong or whatever, but give them the space to do it. At least make them feel that they have a say in how things are changed in their world, right? Autonomy, right? Competence. People need to feel that they're effective at doing the thing that you want them to do. Right? Don't put people in a position where, one, it's way too easy, right? And they just go like, well, what the hell, right? Why did I do all these studies and whatever else? And don't put them in a position where they have no idea what it is they're supposed to do. Right? So make sure that if you're going to put them in a new position, give them the skills, give them the training to do what it is that they need to do. But your players and the people you manage need to feel that they can successfully do the thing that you want them to do. Right? So autonomy, competence, and connectedness. Over the course of your psychology courses, you should have learned that we are extremely social people, right? That it is really important for us to have social connections, right? Even if you go back to the most fundamental studies of the monkeys. You guys remember in intro psych where you took a study and they looked at the wire monkey versus the cloth monkey, and it's like, even though the wired monkey gives them milk, the cloth gives them comfort. It's a really poorly designed study, and we can talk about all that. and that stuff. But at the very root of it, people are social people. They want to feel connected. Okay? So if you want to motivate people within your company or within, I don't know, if you feel like your kid is struggling at school and you're like, why is he not motivated enough to do his work, right? One of the factors might be that they don't feel connected. There isn't a friend that they can go to. There isn't a teacher that they feel connected to. So those three factors, okay? When you're feeling like you are lacking motivation or your team or people are lacking motivation, go back to those three things. Look, right? Am I giving them any sense of autonomy? Right? Are they feeling competent? And is there an opportunity for social connectedness? Right? So that's what I think about the takeaway for motivation. Okay? Another thing when you're working with other people is to be really, really conscious of your expectations of them and understand this self-fulfilling prophecy process. We call it the expectation confirmation process. Understand how crazy critical it is that your fundamental expectations are for people. And as hard and as much as you can, strive to hold high expectations for other people, for everyone, right? Be aware of your own biases, be aware of structural biases of people. It's so important to realize that our biases play such an important role in how we set expectations for people. Right? You look at someone and they look a little bit fat and you go, that kid can't play that position. Boom, right away, right? You look at a kid who's not wearing the right shoes or the right clothes and you go, that kid can't do this. Or you look at the way they run or the way they're dressed or the color of their skin and you go, that kid can't do this kid can't do that, right? And you have to understand that even though the kid ends up not being able to do the thing that you thought, it might not be because of the kid. It might be because of your expectations. Remember the process. It's your expectation. The first thing that it does is it changes your own behavior. It changes how you treat other people. So if I walk into a classroom and I go, that student is not going to learn this material. The first thing that it does is it changes the way I act, the way that I interact with that student. I'm not going to be as warm. I'm not going to say hi. I'm not going to ask about their family. I'm not going to do whatever, right? I'm not going to give them as many opportunities to be involved in the class. Right? And so the first thing my expectation does is it changes my own behavior. And then my behavior changes that person's behavior. So because I'm not very nice to them, I don't give them as many opportunities. And sure enough, they're not, progressing as quickly as the other students. And then of course, that behavior changes their outcomes in a way that reflects how I expected them to act. So I think if you're in a position where you're dealing with people who are in the process of their development, it's so important to understand the power of your expectations. So hold high expectations. Again, it's not easy, just like taking the positive approach. It's not easy. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more work. Right? And within that expectations, right, go back to that book on mindset. If you think this kid can't do that, or that kid can't do that, or whatever, that's a very fixed mindset approach. Right? Have a general understanding that people can get better at the thing that they're trying to do. Right? If you hold any type of expectation, expect that people can change and people can do better. Right? Whether it's math, whether it's basketball, whether it's, I don't know, whatever it is, you should expect that people can do better than what they're doing now. Okay? If not, you probably shouldn't be in that position. Okay? If you think people are the way they are, then you probably shouldn't be in a position where you can affect change because you don't believe in change. Okay, the next thing, goal setting. The science says you got to set goals. Okay, and I would say it very quickly on this is that you need to set big goals and you need to set little goals. Okay, it's a ladder, man. So it's a ladder, or if you think about steps ascending to something, and you got to know what you're walking to, right? But you also have to look at the steps, right? So you got to have little goals, so you know what you're doing in the moment, but you also have to kind of know where these steps are taking you eventually. Okay? So set goals. Effective people tend to set goals. They tend to make a lot of lists, and they tend to look back to see how they're doing. They're constantly evaluating themselves. Okay? So I'll say that very quickly about goal setting. Now, the most obvious one here is don't cheat. Okay? It's very simple advice, but I see it now, especially in the pandemic, okay? Is that whenever I post an assignment, the quickest thing that people will try to do is to see how they can do that assignment as quickly as possible, right? Oftentimes involving cheating. Like, I get it to a certain extent, but the issue with cheating is that it's really cliche, but like, you're really cheating yourself. Like, many of you guys are psych students or whatever, and you want to be a counselor, right? Or you want to be a psychologist, and you want to be in a position to help people. Like, holy crap. Do you want someone to be your counselor who's cheated their way through their degree? Like, oh my God, I don't want that. Do you want that? Do you want to be a counselor where you're looking at your degree and you're like, oh my God, that class, I didn't do any of the work. I copied, or I Googled my way through. When does it stop, right? Eventually, you're going to get into a position where you need the things that you're learning now. So when you continually cheat and cheat and cheat, it's like, okay, well, I have that piece of paper, but do I know anything? And so you get into a position where you constantly question yourself because you've never spent the time to do the work. And I get it. Some students will go, well, it's for sports psychology. I don't really need sports psychology, right? Or it's social psychology. I don't really need social. But like, when do you stop saying that? Right? Where do you draw the line? And so the thing is, when people cheat, that's their default. And when they get into really important positions, they don't know better. They default to cheating. Right? And so it's really basic advice, but don't cheat, okay? Because you're going to get to a position where, that's your default. Like, as soon as you run into something, you go like, oh my gosh, that's hard. What was the last time I did that was hard? Oh yeah, I cheated, right? And so when you set yourself up to cheat, you're going to be put into some really uncomfortable positions where you're going to be, in really important decisions. I'll tell you a quick story. So I was talking to my wife yesterday, and she said, hey, one of our college friends is now involved. She is solely responsible for the rollout of COVID vaccines for an entire city. I'll tell you who she is, or who he or she is. One time I was drinking downtown, and I found this person just like aimlessly wandering around because they were just hammered, right? And so I was like, hey, come on, get in a cab. We'll get home together, right? But that was like, they were like 20, 21. We'll say 21 just because they were drinking. But I'm saying, like, the stuff that you do in your 20s, eventually you're supposed to evolve out of them, right? And if your default is always to be like, oh, cheat, 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 you're gonna get, when you get older, you're gonna get in a position where you're not just responsible for yourself. You're responsible for like kids' mental health. You're responsible for, people living or dying. You don't want to be in a position where you go, oh man, I don't actually know anything myself, right? I have just cheated my way through this. And I'll say one more thing is that many of us are first generation college students. Right? You are the generational change. Right? When people look through the lineage and they go, boom, Vicky was the first person to do this, right? Or Samantha or Santiago, or they're going to hold you up on this pedestal. You have to make sure that you fit that. Right? You don't want to be the generational change on a shallow basis. You want to have the substance to back up that generational change, right? I did it and I did it right, right? Anyways, don't cheat, okay? 2, embrace change, okay? I think I've talked about this example already, but most people who are successful, they don't do the same things over and over. They're going to hit a point where they feel like, man, that's it. I need to evolve. I need to do something else. And it's going to feel scary. It's going to feel scary. And that's kind of how you know that you're doing it right. Okay? So taking the example of a hermit crab, right? Hermit crabs borrow their shells, right? They're this thing, and then they run around and they find a shell and they go, ooh, this feels like home. I'm going to live in it. So they adapt the shell and then they grow into the shell. But once they grow into the shell, if they want to get bigger, they need to find a bigger shell, right? So the shell protects them. If they want to find a bigger shell, they have to leave their little shell and go out and expose themselves, not being covered by a shell, in order to find a bigger one. So during that transition, it's really scary. For hermit crabs, they're literally putting themselves at risk, putting their lives in danger to find a bigger home for themselves. So obviously they're tempted to just run back to their place. Right? But if you do that, you're never going to grow, literally, right? You are limited by your shell. So when you go to find a bigger place, you're trying to do something new, something different, something big, it should feel scary. It should feel unfamiliar. Right? And that's how you know you're doing the right thing. Right? Even though you're tempted to run back, right? If you run back, know that, man, right? It's not helping you grow. Same thing if you're mentoring or you're shaping other people's lives. When they get scared and they come back to you, nudge them back out, right? Sure, provide a safe space, provide a haven, but nudge them back into the world. The point of mentoring isn't to hang on to them. The point is to push them into the world. Okay, so embrace change. Change is important. Okay? And as you get into the process of trying to change your life, okay, focus on controlling the things that you can control. I think the biggest example of this is, so imagine that you're on this journey and you have to walk across the desert and there are 1,000 thorns in the way, right? If you look across and you're trying to make it across and there are just so many thorns, so many obstacles in the way, one thing you can do is try to smash all the thorns, right? So that you can walk through. So try to really change the environment as much as possible, right? So you're walking around smashing all the thorns. Or another way to think of doing this is just to make yourself a pair of sandals, right? Now you can just walk across all the thorns without having to smash all of the thorns along the way. So what does this mean? Well, we are faced with 1,000 things in our environment every day that affect us in negative and positive ways. We don't always have to change those things to better ourselves, right? We don't have to worry about changing everything in our environment if we can just focus on the things that are within ourselves. Right? So focus on how you can navigate without having to change things around you, particularly things that you can't control. So if you have a really terrible boss, like, you don't always have to think about changing or, trying to fix that person. That might not be the best approach. Okay. Work within sort of that landscape. Okay. I also think about, like when there are really strong winds, the trees that tend to do well versus the trees that don't. Okay. Like the trees that tend to do well are the more flexible ones, right? That just kind of go with the wind. The ones that tend to not do well are the really rigid ones that try to fight the forces. Right? So in your everyday lives, you don't necessarily always have to be super resistant and super sort of firm. Sometimes it's better to be flexible and to go along with sort of the ups and downs. Right? And the last thing I'll say in terms of being successful is that try to be here, be now as much as you can. Okay, and this goes back to our chapter on mindfulness. We spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about the past. Right? I think we all do this. Like we're in the shower and we're thinking about some awkward thing we did in middle school, right? Like, or you're thinking about your last job interview, or like we can't go back. We'd like to, but we can't. Or we spend an inordinate amount of time pre-living. For example, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, my wife and I had a fight about whether or not we should buy a new car or a used car. We are years away from buying a car, by the way, like years. So we're sitting there having an argument about things that are completely immaterial, but it leaves us feeling exhausted in the moment. We're arguing sometimes with ourselves, sometimes with other people about things that have happened in the past, things that are going to happen in the future, maybe. And we're sort of spoiling the current moment. So with that, understand that you're always going to be dragged into the past, right, with your thoughts. And you're also going to have thoughts that drag you into the future. But if you take the mindfulness approach, is to simply acknowledge the presence of those thoughts. You don't have to give them power beyond that. And you don't have to feel bad about thinking about the past or thinking about the future. It's this non-judgmental factor, right? Non-judgmental, compassionate factor. Like if you're sitting there and you get dragged into something in the past and you're sitting there feeling negative, you don't have to sit there and go, oh my God, what a dummy I am, right? I'm a miserable person. You just go, hey, my thoughts took me there. They don't need to go there anymore. I'm just going to go back to the present. Same thing, if you get dragged into the future, acknowledge it. Acknowledge that your thoughts have wandered and then bring yourself back to the present without judging yourself for it. I just think it's so important, like in our everyday lives, and particularly now, we almost don't have a second to ourselves. Like if we're waiting for something, we pull out our phone almost immediately. Right? Like I know I do. If I'm inconvenienced in the very least bit, I will pull out my phone. If I'm waiting for my food in the microwave for a minute, I know I'm not sitting there for a minute. I'm pulling out my phone. That's a problem, guys, is that we don't have time to be here, be now. right? So as much as you can, focus on here, right? Maybe you wanted something different for your life than what you have now, right? But you have what you have. And what you have is what you have, right? You know, it's not what you don't have. It's not what you want or what you didn't want. It's what you have is what you have. And so if you don't, you know, be in the moment, you're not going to be there with what you have. Right? So, and again, we all do this. It's a process, and it's something you're probably, if you're interested, it's something you're going to do for the rest of your life. Is to think about how I can be in the moment here more often. Right? And think back to that exercise I gave you that one time where you wrote down the negative things about yourself and you held it up to your face. Right? Understand that you don't have to do that. You can crumble it. You can set it off to the side. It doesn't mean that it goes away, but you don't need to run your life through that lens. Right? If you are here, if you are now. Okay. So that is my guide to living the good life. Right? It's really more than you bargained for, but that is my guide. And these are all the things I am currently working on too. Right? I am certainly not above any of them. These things are hard things to do, right? But I think hard things are important to do, right? Hard things are important to do. Okay. That is it, guys. That is the course. If you are interested